This is Ernest Shackleton. He meant to be a pioneer with 27 of his men, crew, who first tried to cross Antarctica by their ship in 1915. Well, after 1 month, their plan was a garbage, and it became one of the biggest survival stories in history. This was their plan. It was a very intelligent plan, actually. They tried to cross the Weddell Sea, and by their ship named Endurance, they wanted to cross the blocks of ice via the help of the climate, which were just spreading around. They were going to reach the South Pole and then cross over the Antarctica from the other side and go back to their home, which was England. Well, things started to go terribly bad. At the first month, the ship got trapped in ice because the weather was very bad and the blocks of ice started to hold the ship and get some pressure on the ship. They waited in the ship, and after 3 months, the ship was cracked down. So now they were all alone in Antarctica with no help, and Shackleton's first ideal to be a pioneer changed on the way. Now his ideal was to save all his 27 men, all alive, out of Antarctica. They did a lot of things to distribute their tedium because the biggest enemy there was tedium. Hopelessness was the biggest enemy. So Shackleton took the responsibility. He gave a lot of decisions on the way, countless decisions, to keep their men's morale up and also to find a way to get out of the situation. Well, he gave many decisions, as I said. The first one was to abandon the ship and march on the ice. Well, the ship's carpenter was a designer, and he said, we shouldn't leave. We should stay, disassemble the ship, and make a bigger boat, because the only supply that they could take with them was 3 small boats, their food supply, and their blankets, nothing more. But Shackleton decided to march. They marched for a week, but the surface of the ice, the terrain was so bad that they couldn't move anymore after 1 week. They had to stay and make the camp. Well, after that, they had to stay and wait for the ice to open so that they could go to the open sea. They waited, the ice opened, and they were sailing over an ice cube with all their supplies. Next, well, the first decision proved to be a fail. The second decision, he tended to go to the Poland Island, which years ago other seamen has left some food supply there, so that they could reach the food supply and survive more. They drifted with the ice cube to the Poland Island, but the sea currents didn't let them reach the Poland Island and they drifted away. The second decision was a fail again. The third decision, he decided to move to the Elephant Island, which was an island that no man had stepped before, but it was the nearest one. And they, after months of sailing, they needed a concrete land to find a shelter. Well, they moved to the Elephant Island. That decision was a success. They could do it. Next decision, they couldn't stay there because they were going to die. It's not on the route of other ships. So he decided to go to the South Georgia whaling station, but leave 24 of his men on the Elephant Island and just take 3 of his men to reach the South Georgia whaling station, so that he could borrow a boat from the whale hunters, take the boat, go back to the Elephant Island and save his men. Well, that was a tough plan. But long story short, they succeeded. And 27 men survived out of Antarctica despite those tough situations, and it became to be one of the biggest survival stories in history. Well, these 27 men never ever hesitated to listen to Shackleton's decisions. What kind of a leader is Shackleton? What made him that his men listened to him in all of his decisions? Well, let's get back to some persuasion techniques that Shackleton naturally had. But you can find it in every leader's speech and in every influenced leader's decisions. Aristotle in ancient Greek, 300 years ago, 3,000 years ago, coined those three terms of modes of persuasion, which were three Latin terms: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is the credibility as a leader. You persuade your team, you persuade your influencers, because you are officially the boss. You have the title, you have the credibility. People have to listen to you. The second mode of persuasion is pathos, which is the emotion as a leader that you distribute to your team. It's the trust, it's the safety, it's the energy, it's the love, it's the tone of speech. The third one, the logos. Of course, every decision you make as a leader has to make sense to your team. You have to be logical. Either leaders using those persuasion techniques, or either the team members that are listening to the leaders are evaluating with those persuasion techniques. So of course Shackleton had the ethos, but if he wasn't self-confident, if he didn't have that tone of speech, and if he didn't have the relationship with his men through the emotions, it was very easy for their men to split up and to go to other ways in that tough situations, because every decision you take is life or death. It's one of the toughest decisions. And of course, Shackleton's decisions made sense because he had the experience, he knows the sea situations, he knows very well about the geography, he has that expertise to make some logical decisions. Leaders have 5 different types of power. This was coined in 1950s by French and Raven. That's a very effective model of leadership powers. But to keep it simple, we can categorize it to just 2 categories. The first is the formal power you have as a leader. Again, you have the title, you have the right to give decision. The second power you have, it's the power of fear. If you are a boss in a company, you can fear your people by letting them quit their jobs, or you can downgrade them. You have the power of reward. If they're successful, you give more money, you upgrade them, you give them a title. In Shackleton's situation, he never used those powers. Never. Because he had the power of fear. He had a gun, eventually. He could shoot a man if they disobeyed. He had the power of reward. He could give some more food to better behaving man. But he didn't use it. Instead, he used some personal powers. Personal powers is very easy to say, but it's very tough to achieve. It takes very long. If you're an expert in something, for example, if you're a professor in a university, it takes 20 years to become a professor. It takes very long time to become a great technical engineer. But people trust your work because you're the expert. You know it the best. And the second type of personal power is the referent power. The referent power is, it doesn't have a single formula. It's the energy. It's the love you spread. It's your tone of speech. It's how you behave, how you get relationships with your team. Referent powers become founders of countries, or great leaders that can be remembered for centuries, like Kemal Atatürk. Shackleton had some referent powers to his men, so that their man has obeyed what he did. And personal powers are lateral powers. They last long. Even if you lose that title, if you're not on that position anymore, it stays, it lives with you. But on the other hand, formal powers is more authoritarian, but it's very short-sighted. When the situation is closed, when you are not having that title anymore, it's gone. So it is effective, but it should be used very carefully. And it shouldn't be used if you mustn't anymore. Who would say that great leaders are standard thinkers? Great leaders have out-of-the-box thinking skills in tough situations, in most stressful situations. That's what makes them a great leader. Well, system has imposed us to have analytical thinking. This is also a heritage from ancient Greek, from Aristotle, Socrates, Plato. Well, you have to think analytically because you have to have the power of judgment. If something is right or wrong, if something is good or bad, there is only one single solution in analytical thinking. The power of lateral thinking was underestimated for centuries. In economy, in politics, in education, we were taught to learn analytically. But we weren't taught very much about creative thinking, about the power of design. In the power of design, there are modes of thinking. You have to look at the problems at different angles. Maybe you won't face the first challenge, you won't solve the first challenge that you face, but you will find another disruptive kind of thinking that would change the world. Let's take as an example the telephone industry. Well, were the telephones that had keyboards and list menus enough for us? Absolutely, they were enough for communicating. But one day a man came out and said, well, I'm changing the interface of the telephone. I'm getting a touch screen and put some apps on it and open this app store to the entrepreneurs. No one has thought about it. It wasn't a need. It was just creative thinking. But the world changed. That impact of the telephone multiplied by 1,000 times in people's lives. Shackleton had a very nice quote that I cannot forget at any time. He said he was in very tough situations and he gave decisions, numerous decisions. Sometimes he was lucky. He just jumped out of a stiff climb. He was alive. They went sailing on an ice cube in a storm. They had very little chance of survival. They survived. But after all, Shackleton didn't say I was lucky. He said, I gave luck a chance. That's what's important. That's the gap between knowing and doing. If you don't start elaborating your ideas and getting into action, you will never know if you are going to fail or if you are going to succeed. To learn about, knowing about your experiences, you have to start doing it. Well, initially you have an idea, you start executing it. Sometimes you go to other paths. In every loop, you have to evaluate if you are sticking to your original idea. If it proves to be wrong, you can change your idea on your way. But after that, you can find a great solution. Did Shackleton imagine this story to be a survival story? No, he didn't imagine that. But after those decisions and after the consequences, he had to admit that this was a survival story. He didn't insist on reaching the pole and being a hero and becoming dead after all. He changed on his way, and he gave numerous decisions. So, as the high school students, as the ones that are the beginning of your career, a career of leadership, you have to start deciding about your ideals, getting them into action, and start getting things done. Thank you.